Okay, I think we should make a start. Some people will still arrive during the early part, but that's fine. A very warm welcome to BERA and to the early careers segment of the conference in particular. My name is David James, and I was recently elected to BERA Council. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it did. I'm very pleased about it. I work at Cardiff University, where I'm a professor in the School of Social Sciences, and whilst there I look after the Wales ESRC Doctoral Training Centre, and I also edit a journal called the British Journal of Sociology of Education, and a few other things as well. But more than any of that, the reason I'm here, sort of standing here now, is that I'm a long-standing member of BERA. And I was thinking the other day, it's about 25 years. And I think, for me, BERA has been one of the most important things in my professional life as an educational researcher, and how that sort of career has developed. BERA has been a very important support. And come to think of it, I presented my second ever conference paper at a BERA conference. And at the time, I'd not long started a part-time PhD alongside a job in teacher education. And thinking about that time reminds me that the world of educational research, in that world, it's important to remember that early career researchers come in all shapes and sizes. Some are full-time, some are part-time, some are soon after a first degree, some a long time after a first degree. Others have been teaching for years, some are not even postgraduates, some may hold management positions, and in all other senses be late career. And I think it's crucial that we remember that when, as a professional body, we're trying to support and engage with the broader research community that thinks about educational issues. And it's something I find myself discussing with one of the research councils from time to time, because they seem to forget that kind of point rather easily. Anyway, I'm not going to say much, as I want to get on to introducing our keynote speaker in a moment. But first, I thought it was worth mentioning that there's a recent development in BERA that is specifically focused on a particular kind of early career researcher, and it's called the BERA Postgraduate Forum. And it's been very successful. It exists in three senses, really, and they are its people, its events, and what I call the virtual. So first, the people. Well, the PGR Forum has 4 conveners, and they're approaching the last part of a 2-year term of office, as it were. And they're all current or recent doctoral students. And they're not paid, but they do have a role specification. And in return, they get some concessions from BERA. The conveners are currently Adam Burns, Rilla Rappa, Patsy Davis, and Fiona Willans. Although Fiona, perhaps on the strength of being a convener, I don't know, is now working in Fiji. Second, the events. So far, the main events have been a series of one-day workshops run by those conveners. And there have been 6 of them, and 2 in Scotland, 2 in London, and a couple roughly in the middle. And at those events, a group of about 10 people, generally speaking, who are doing doctoral research come together and present to each other in a structured programme, chaired by the convener. There's usually a more experienced researcher present as well, and usually they're talking about, the participants are talking about methodological dilemmas or other issues that they're facing in their doctoral research. And these have been very successful. It's something to do with a space that's alternative to the home institution, no supervisors present. I think that's quite interesting, but they've been very successful. Thirdly, the virtual. The PG Forum, Postgraduate Forum, exists in another sense, and one of the conveners, Patsy Davies, we sometimes call her the E-convener, has been very active in trying to use blogging and other means to get those supportive relationships to continue after the meeting with some success. And we look forward to doing more with BERA's All Singing, All Dancing website as it develops. BERA, you may know, has recently published an issue of Research Intelligence called Postgraduate Research in the Spotlight. And I think that, in a sense, BERA has come of age with a realization, a full realization, that it's really, really important. It's a priority indeed to support researchers during their research training in the early part of that. We've got several plans for taking that forum ahead, but I won't dwell on those now. But I'd like to turn instead to our keynote talk for this part of the programme. First of all, some news that may not have got round to you all, which is that I'm very much afraid that Kalwant Bhopal, who was actually selected by the Postgraduate Forum to give this talk, is unwell, and very sorry that she can't come and give her talk on BME academics. Now, we will be giving her the choice of doing that talk either in a further separate event or indeed at next year's conference. So we might have to wait a bit longer, but we won't lose the opportunity altogether. And I'm very pleased about that. However, on behalf of BERA and the conference committee, I'm absolutely delighted that Andrew Brown, colleague at the Institute of Education, has agreed to step into the breach at very short notice. And he is based here at the Institute. He's a sociologist of education with research interests in the process of research capacity building, doctoral and research education, digital technology, and the relationship between the everyday professional and academic discourse and practice. He's also got a senior and strategic role here at the Institute, so he's a pro-director academic development. And I recently came across some work of his on adult vocational education in Singapore. So he does get around a bit as well. Andrew's talk is entitled De-institutionalizing Knowledge Production and the Pedagogic Career. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Andrew to give our talk.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Don't ask how short notice is. I found out who put me in the frame for this, and what he said was that I am not fazed by urgent requests. That's not really something you want to get known for. Anyway, right, so this is my kind of rather pretentious title to the presentation. There is a reason for all these things. Really what it's about is this, research and teaching. I did play with some other possible titles, A Tale of Two Diagrams, because there are two diagrams. Whoops, I should have warned you to don't get frightened. Two diagrams that feature in this. One is by Basil Bernstein, which is this one, and the other one by myself and Paul Dowling, which is this one. But I kind of settled in the end on this. And what it's about, basically, the first bit, deinstitutionalizing knowledge production, is about the way in which where research is done and knowledge is produced has kind of shifted. And there are questions then about, well, what happens when you kind of take that process of creating new knowledge out of institutions like universities and put it somewhere else? I'm on one of these crazy LinkedIn kind of mailing lists, and I get stuff all the time about thought leadership. I kind of wondered, I'd never imagined that there would be a career in thought leadership, that kids would aspire to be thought leaders. And I actually worked for an organisation that had a KPI to make the majority of its staff thought leaders. And so that's kind of about, well, okay, if new ideas, new types of knowledge shift somewhere else, What are the criteria by which we judge that as knowledge, as new knowledge, is a question. So that side's about kind of research and the changing locus of research. And the other bit is about pedagogic work. So it's about more than teaching. It's about the kind of multiplication of sites in which people do pedagogic work. The internet being one of those kind of places where teaching goes on, and learning goes on. And the kind of multiplication of agents who engage in pedagogic work. So it's not just about teachers and teaching, it's about a whole range of other forms of pedagogic activity, learning in workplaces, for instance. Now, you can't really see that very well, but that's what Prezi does, is it gives you a big kind of sheet on which to kind of play, and then you kind of paste things around and you create links between them. So my canvas is this, and within this, I've got kind of links made and bits of text and pictures which will come up. Where I'm going to start is, this is a part of the conference that's specifically aimed at early career researchers, and that's kind of people who are either doing doctorates or have recently completed doctorates. So I wanted to kind of think, first of all, a little bit about what it is that we kind of give doctorates for. So this is from the kind of our own UK higher education framework, and it says that doctorates are awarded to students who've demonstrated creation and interpretation of new knowledge through original research, etc., systematic acquisition of understanding of a substantial body of knowledge, general ability to conceptualize, design, and implement a project, etc., forefront of the discipline, adjust the project design in the light of unforeseen problems, detailed understanding of applicable techniques for research, and advanced academic inquiry. So a doctorate is aimed at giving you these kinds of competencies, kind of skills, knowledge. And so, having acquired a doctorate, then these are the things that you should be able to do. Make informed judgments on complex issues in specialist fields, often in the absence of complete data, and be able to communicate the ideas, conclusions clearly and efficiently effectively to specialist and non-specialist audiences. So it's not just about creating stuff, it's about being able to mediate that to a variety of different types of kind of audiences. Carrying on, doing research, either kind of fundamental research, applied research, but to continue on and create new knowledge. And have transferable skills that are necessary for employment, requiring exercise of personal responsibility, etc. As David has already said, one of the things that marks out education as I wouldn't call it a discipline, I suppose, I'd call it a kind of a region of work, a kind of a field of research, is the kind of complexity and diversity of the types of doctoral students we have, and the kind of degrees of experience they have, and the trajectories they then follow, having completed a doctorate. And this is kind of reflected in a kind of multiplication of forms of doctorate in recent years. So in 1995, when I was doing my doctorate part-time here at the Institute of Education, there was one award, and that was a PhD. And you could either do it full-time or part-time. That was the field of possible forms of doctorate. 2010, when I finished my time here as Dean of the Doctoral School, we offered a whole range of different types of awards. PhD, as before, PhD by publication. So for experienced researchers who've got a body of work that don't have a doctorate, putting together publications, putting a kind of a piece that makes links between those pieces they've submitted and constitutes it as a coherent body of work. That's how Basil Bernstein, who I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, got his PhD. He got that through the University of London by taking 4 of his papers, sticking them together, and then writing a bit over the top that says, this is why these things belong together. This is why this is a body of work. Basil's problem, I think, was that that's how he continued the rest of his career, by producing things and then stitching them together and then saying they make a complex whole. And what we've all had to do is to torment ourselves by trying to figure out how come. But within there's a lot of really interesting ideas. PhD by practice performance. This is kind of for people working in the kind of visual arts, performing arts. They create something and they create a commentary that goes on top of it that kind of relates it to what's happening within the field. EdD, Doctor of Education for experienced practitioners in different forms, an international one, a dual one with another institution. And then the Doctor of Educational Psychology, which is this kind of a degree that's both inducting people into doing research and producing new knowledge and training them to be practitioners within a particular field of practice. So here we've got a kind of a multiplication of what it is that a doctorate is and what it prepares you to do, but at the heart of it is the idea that you are creating kind of new knowledge. Professional doctorates now, I mean, in my view, actually constitute the core of doctoral work in fields like education. So now we've got a kind of a form of doctorate that's relating directly to practice and having direct impact on professional practice and policy as a kind of an integral part of that. One of the things that doctorates do is that they kind of transform people, they change them. And these are kind of some statements made by some of our EdD students about what they gained from doing an EdD here. And I'll just point to a couple of them. This one, professionally, I've realized that research is not a thing added on to all other things that I do in my life, but it's now central to me as a professional. I've always considered myself a reflective practitioner and someone open to different ideas, but through undertaking the EdD, I've become even more reflective and certainly more skilled in doing so. I now see research-informed practice as essential to sound development and progress. I know that I'm some way yet from being a skilled researcher, but also feel more committed and confident that the path I wish to continue along, and I have a much clearer sense of direction. So it's a transformative experience that's actually embedding the production of new knowledge into practice. And there are others. These 4 papers give me the opportunity to reflect, more objective and systematic way, etc. More examples. So the point here is to start to kind of think about, have there been kind of shifts in this kind of way? Oops, sorry, I've just turned something off, I think. One way of looking at this is that we've got a shift in terms of Michael Gibbons and kind of colleagues from mode 1 production of knowledge to mode 2 production of knowledge. This is where mode 1 consists of linear, causal, cumulative forms of knowledge originating in universities and other research institutes, applied to solve practical problems outside the university, closed in a source for knowledge, is always originating within the discipline, reductionist and determinist. Modes 2, instead of science preceding technology, technology is seen as autonomous and able to develop outside science, transdisciplinary, with a source for identifying problems and solutions resting in the practice setting. Synoptic rather than reductionist, and hierarchical and transient. So there's a kind of shift, not just in where knowledge is created, but what constitutes knowledge. And I think the kind of what's happening within the kind of field of doctoral studies is a kind of reflection of this. Just to test out what people thought they were doing doctorates for in another context, I asked some students in Hong Kong why they were doing their doctorates, and it was to prepare for an uncertain future. And that kind of resonates with the statement that we saw earlier. It's about uncertainty, it's about flexibility, it's about kind of adapting, changing, creating something new. Be better and improve my profession. Fulfill my personal ambitions. Prepare for an academic career. Decreasingly, though, people doing doctorates are going into academic careers. There's more and more people not taking up academic careers, but going into other forms of work. Learn new techniques. Make a contribution to knowledge. You have to do that. And grow as a person. And some people said, well, look, my job just requires it, something that I need. Okay, so how does that relate to this, which is that kind of scary diagram from Basil Bernstein, which is on the social construction of discourse. What Bernstein is trying to do here is to relate the social social relations in the production of knowledge to those of the reproduction of knowledge. So at the top of the diagram, these are people engaged in, on the field of production side, in the creation of new forms of knowledge. Scientists working in labs, social scientists is doing field work. It's kind of, you've got a community, you're producing knowledge within that community, it's evaluated within that community and propagated within it. So you've got this kind of a social structuring of the production of knowledge there. On the other side, we've got a kind of field of symbolic control. There are people who govern, I suppose, kind of crudely speaking, and they do that through kind of symbolic means. And within this field of production, you've got a bringing together of production of new knowledge and control of populations, symbolic control. This knowledge is recontextualized. So in the middle of this diagram, there are people, agents, who are engaged with taking this knowledge and doing something with it, repurposing it, turning it into something to be applied in different types of contexts, and therefore transforming that knowledge. And then at the bottom of the diagram here, we've got a group of people who are engaged in the reproduction of knowledge. We've got a body of knowledge, and what we're doing is reproducing that in various contexts, like schools and colleges, and other kinds of pedagogic sites. The knowledge, as it's reproduced, as it's transmitted, or as it's mediated to kids in schools, people in colleges, etc., is not the same as the knowledge as produced. It's been pedagogized. It's been curricularized. It's been ordered into a sequence. It's been placed within a number of pedagogic devices that enable us to communicate it to a new and different kind of audience. So the relationship between this and the previous stuff is that in moving towards different types of doctorates, we're also starting to disrupt agency within this pattern of production and reproduction of knowledge. Now, there's nothing in Bernstein's work that doesn't say that the people who do this, the agents, can't be the same people. The people producing it can be the people reproducing it. The people producing it can be the recontextualizers. What's important here is that kind of process. There's work that illustrates this. If we look at the type of language that's used in, let's say, biology papers, people publishing within the field of academic biology, it's different from the language of the biology textbook. Whereas within the academic community, we're quite happy to talk about uncertainty. Within the classroom, we've got kind of facts and knowledge that we deal with. Stuff has a kind of a greater certainty at the point of reproduction than it does at the point of production. It has to be uncertain at that kind of stage. So we've got a kind of this shifting, but actually we've got a change in agency. And one of the things that I suppose we're all now doing is engaging in this kind of process in a more kind of knowing way. One of the other things that Bernstein was concerned with is this kind of, it says ID over RD. There's a little kind of fraction in the middle. This is the kind of stuff that Alan Sokal kind of criticized the social sciences for, which is taking bits out of mathematics and using the kind of means to kind of using it within the social sciences. What that means is that regulative discourse is always embedded in instructional discourse. So if we're constructing something to transmit as kind of knowledge, it's not just an act of knowledge acquisition, there's also regulation going on. So school classrooms are regulative devices as well as devices to transmit or kind of acquire knowledge in Bernstein's terms. He says there are three systems: curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And these are carriers of ideas. So the curriculum, the ordering of knowledge means something beyond just the kind of characteristics of the knowledge. What comes first matters. What comes next matters. It carries a certain message. The same with how we transmit it and the same with how we assess it. So, that's the last school that I ever taught in. That's Rotherfield School in Islington here. It was built in 1870 by the London School Board. All over London, we're teaching in buildings like this. 1870s, schools were really kind of there to control unruly rural populations that were pouring into the city. So people coming in, what are we going to do with all these kids? We'll build schools, we'll corral these kids into the schools, and we'll develop a kind of a curriculum that teaches them what we think they need to know, and we'll do it in a way that enables us to kind of handle those kids. That's the classroom inside that building. So we can see the building as a technology and the classroom as a kind of technology within that. It's organized in a particular way. Those aren't my kids, they were there a long time before me. But the classroom itself is actually identical to that, with those kind of brown tiles along the back and windows along the side so the head teacher can walk through and see what's going on within the classrooms. So pretty much as that was. The curriculum in the 1870s, just to give you a taste of what that was, I'm not going to read it all out, but this is from the Newcastle report. This is Guy James Fraser, an assistant commissioner, quoted with agreement in the Newcastle report 1861. And what he kind of says is, look, there are only boys in schools, of course, at this time. Not true, but it's always a he. He shall be able to spell correctly the words he will ordinarily have to use. He shall read a common narrative, a paragraph in a newspaper that he cares to read, with sufficient ease to be pleasurable to himself or convey information. If gone to live at a distance from home, he shall write his mother a letter that shall be both legible and intelligible. He knows enough of ciphering to make out or test the correctness of the common shop bill, etc., etc. This is a really basic curriculum. Teach kids to read. Don't teach them to write too much. They might go and write some kind of seditious literature that might be kind of circulated around. So we've got a particular kind of basic curriculum. But then we've also got a form of, so how are you going to teach this stuff? Pedagogically, what are you going to do? Well, there's nothing, actually. These things are just, they're created technologies. In terms of the means that you use to teach this stuff, where do you look? Well, one place you might look to the church and kind of say, well, okay, you've got a congregation and you've got the kind of, somebody who stands in front of the congregation and kind of marshals them and controls them and preaches to them, much as I am doing here today. In fact, this is used as a church on Saturdays, I think, during the kind of, people reach for what's at hand. They construct forms of pedagogy out of the ready to hand, whatever's around. They're not designed techniques. They're just stuff that people did to manage a particular situation that they found themselves in, and it has certain kinds of effects. So Ian Hunter, in his account of the kind of development of pedagogy in this particular period, says that what we have is an account of the school not as the flawed realization of a principle, but as an improvised reality assembled from the available moral and governmental technologies as a means of coping with historical contingency. Now, the reason that I've just pointed to this is to say, well, we're not kind of... What schools weren't designed to do what we wish to do with them now. The forms of pedagogy that we use come from somewhere else, and we're still working with them. They predate us, and they shape what we do, and we adapt and change in relation to that. So when we kind of see things like this, which is Higher Education Academy says, look, 6 new pedagogical ideas: learner empowerment, future-facing education, decolonizing education, transformative capabilities, crossing boundaries, social learning. They're built on top of a set of techniques that are already there. And embedded within those techniques are those regulative practices that Bernstein points to when he says, well, look, any instructional discourse has within it a set of regulative practices as well. They come as part and parcel of the same thing. Okay, right. So, we have this kind of idea of changing locus. We've got different forms of pedagogic site, and we've got different kind of agents who are kind of moving between production and reproduction of knowledge. I'm just going to now run through a little kind of personal history of this. This is me. This is off my student union card. Oh, no, I won't say when. So now, we all get into education in different kinds of ways. And how I got into it is that I finished school with maths, physics and chemistry A-levels. I went to the University of Warwick to study theoretical physics. I absolutely hated it. It was abominable. In the first month that I was there, so miserable, a kind of visiting kind of Penguin book exhibition came along. I went down there. There were all these really interesting books on education. I thought, what I want to do is to figure out how come I've ended up in this miserable situation. How come everything has kind of added up to something that's actually so inappropriate, unfulfilling and wrong? So I bought a pile of these books and I just read them all. I quit university and I went and kind of worked for a little while and came back to study education. So the types of things that I read were this, like Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I read this, Education for Democracy, which is a collection of papers that are kind of produced with a kind of that particular theme. And in there is a quote from Basil Bernstein, well, it's a paper by Basil Bernstein, Education Cannot Compensate for Society. And what it says in this paper, one quotes, if the culture of the teacher is to become part of the consciousness of the child, then the culture of the child must first be in the consciousness of the teacher, which I think kind of has informed pretty much everything that I've done since that point. What it kind of means is that if you're attempting to relay something, you have to have some sense of the culture of those to whom you are attempting to relay it. There's a kind of reciprocality here. That relates back to the big funny diagram, and it relates back to the ideas of new kinds of doctorates. We're starting to kind of move ourselves into a same space whilst maintaining a kind of dialogue. So this is my kind of career in relation to my kind of learning, my research and my teaching. I did actually have a job before all of this. Go back, there we go. So my first job here was in fact when I was 4 years old, and it was as a child model. Cute, huh? Should have stuck with it, shouldn't I, really? That would have been good. But so there are alternative narratives here. So actually I could have a thing here which is my kind of work history, which then takes you through the paper rounds that I did and other types of things. In each of these kind of settings, from my degree onwards, I did a degree in education at University College of North Wales in Bangor. I wanted to do it at Warwick. I wanted to go back to Warwick and do education and sociology. And a guy called Bob Burgess interviewed me and didn't offer me a place. So, I never forgive him for that. Anyway, but it was great in Bangor. And I did a piece of work there which was about student alienation from learning in rural junior schools. So I sat in a school which was above Colwyn Bay in the hills, for day after day after day, and I just watched kids, what they did in classrooms, and attempted to look at those kids that I felt were alienated from the processes and practices of schooling, and kind of what was at the kind of root of that, combining kind of non-participant observation with interviews with kids and looking at the kind of work they were producing and talking to teachers. Clearly relates to my own position. I'm asking questions about why am I alienated from the education system. What I'm trying to do here is to kind of go back to kind of primary schooling and ask some questions about that. When I started as a teacher in London, I did a master's degree at South Bank Poly, now the University of South Bank. Never know what you do on a CV with those kinds of things, you know? What do you put? Polytechnic of South Bank, University of South Bank? What will we put if the Institute of Education then moves kind of to be part of University College London? So where's my degree from? Well, my doctorate, anyway. School intake characteristics and pedagogic change. So the question here is, I'm a young teacher in London, struggling with the classes that I've got to teach in primary schools at this time. Schools in one bit of the borough that I teach are very different from schools in the other bit. But if I look at the demographics, the census returns, they're pretty much the same in terms of the social class distribution. Is there something going on in terms of the cultures of the children and the pedagogic practices of the school? Is there something that's not that we adopt whatever pedagogic practices we want and we implement them, but is there a possibility space? That is, certain types of relationship between school cultures and home cultures create certain types of pedagogic opportunities and possibilities. So I was painfully aware that there were all sorts of things that I wanted to do pedagogically that I just couldn't do. And I couldn't do because of my need to control that situation and have some kind of degree of control within the setting that I'm working. And that changes as the nature of the relationship between the school and the culture of the school and the culture of the home changes. So I started to look at, I won't say much about this, but looking at two sides of this borough and looking at different types of relationships. On the one side, parents seen by the school as having low opinion of schooling. On the other side of the borough, parents thought to have a positive attitude to schooling. What you get on these two sides is, on one side, you get an organic relationship between the school and its community, and on the other side, you get a critical relationship. On the critical relationship side, people are struggling day in, day out to get by and make do in the classroom, and they're fearsomely innovative. They do everything. Every in-service training thing you turn up at, you've got people from one side of the borough who are there to do something different, change things, try something different. So it's kind of innovation going on there. The other side, we've actually got a more kind of a different relationship. Things can change, but because of the kind of organic relationship, they change through choice. So sometimes head teachers say, let's do this, and then people do it, and by and large it works if it kind of resonates with that kind of culture of the home on that side. So on one side we've got change kind of taking place kind of rapidly, innovation, but struggle, and on the other side we've got a different modality of change taking place. And what you get is high staff turnover on the critical side and low staff turnover on the other. You've got people on the critical side moving to the other side of the borough to take up senior posts and then make the people in the schools do the stuff that they did on the other side. So you've got interesting kind of flows and patterns of innovation within a particular local authority. So again, what I'm doing here is taking my own kind of setting and then trying to make kind of sense out of that through engagement with a kind of set of ideas. Oops, let's go. Next piece of work for my doctorate here, parental participation in primary mathematics. How come we have initiatives like involving parents in the kind of work their kids do at school that claim to be of benefit to everybody, but actually seem to advantage the advantaged and disadvantage the disadvantaged? So something like parental participation makes big claims about how it alters everybody's educational opportunities. My sense was, actually, there's things going on here that actually advantage one group over and above the other, and it's not the group that we wanted to advantage. And what's happening here, for me, is, again, the resonance between the culture of the school and the culture of the home, and the confidence of parents to manipulate the means that they're given in order to influence the educational trajectories of their children. I'm not going to go into that in any kind of detail, but one of the things that I was kind of interested in here, I did kind of a number of studies, an ethnographic study, a semiotic study, going into classrooms, going into schools, interviewing parents, interviewing teachers. One of the things I was interested in is kind of what is it that distinguishes teachers from parents? And one of the, a lot of teachers are parents. How come I, as a teacher within a school, can't manifest myself as a parent in a staff meeting? So I can't stand up when people say, well, parents should do this, and say, well, hold on a moment, I'm a parent and I'm not doing that, or I'm not like that, or I don't do things like that. So I was interested in the way in which teacher discourse acts to kind of create some kind of community, a way of speaking, a way of interrelating within teachers. You can recognize, I think I can recognize teachers. I can sit in a coffee bar and know when there are teachers kind of sitting at the next table. It's a way of being, a way of talking, a way of doing things. So we've got different areas of social practice are characterized by different discourses. These consist of serious statements that can or could be made within it. They might therefore be able to identify such a thing as teacher discourse, the characteristics which could be established empirically from what people say, And then you kind of posit the kind of characteristics of this from empirical instances of what people say and do and how they are. So it's not just what you, such as spoken language, it's also physical, visible language. It's about space, it's about how you look, it's about how you move, as well as what you say. I'm interested particularly in the what you say here. I'm interested in the way in which teachers talk about parents, what they assume they are, how they assume that they behave, and the ways in which we can talk almost non-problematically about a very, very highly kind of diffuse and kind of complex body of people. So kind of exploring here this kind of idea of professional discourses. But the thing about being a teacher then, or being anybody involved in pedagogic work, is that this stuff predates you. You don't get in unless you show some of the characteristics of the people who are this. So within any kind of pedagogic career, there is a kind of a degree of pre-conceptualization of what it is to be. What's the right kind of person? How do they do things? How do they speak? What are they like? And that's kind of a selection, set of principles that kind of, by which you get entry into that. So I'm starting to kind of probe away at, kind of, well, what is it that differentiates parents and teachers? What is it that kind of makes you a teacher? And how is that produced and reproduced? Other work, working in Bangladesh, trying to get then a new community of people involved in producing new knowledge. So this is about kind of research capability and capacity building. Getting people working in schools, asking questions, collecting data, analysing that data, and doing that kind of collectively. Looking at virtual communities, looking at professional doctorates, developing a national research strategy for adult vocational education in Singapore, setting up 3 centres, one on learning, one on work, and one on impact. And I suppose this is where I'm starting to get more interested in different types of pedagogic settings. Those centres, developing an infrastructure, and taking a broad view of approaches to evidence and research. So one of the things that's starting to concern me now then is that I'm presenting here an integration of production and reproduction of research. What's happening more broadly seems to be a pulling apart of those things. So more often we get kind of the idea of knowledge of what works being applied in practice rather than the development of knowledge within that. Okay. So we're implementing here a whole range of different types of ways of doing research, and we're kind of looking at kind of evidence-informed policy and practice, but asking questions about what is it that counts as evidence, how will evidence be used, who will use the evidence, and making sure that there's a dialogue between the people who are producing this stuff and the people who are applying and using it. Our strategy here was to kind of not disseminate things, but to actually involve the potential users of research in doing the research right from the very beginning and in setting the questions. So to kind of integrate rather than just to disseminate. We also looked at monitoring and evaluation and tried to set up a system by which we could evaluate the impact of the things that we were kind of implementing. And then I get to where I am now, I suppose, which is thinking about adult educator careers in Singapore and elsewhere. Who becomes an educator? Why? How does that shape what they do? How does that shape the trajectories that they follow? What I haven't done in any of this is actually talk then about what research is. So we've kind of put that away to the kind of side. And so just to kind of outline what I think it is, I suppose it's the principled production of general statements. That is that. I'm trying to say something that's about more than the particular thing that I'm looking at. So I might be looking at particular classrooms, particular adult education settings, particular workplaces, but I want to make statements that are kind of bigger than that. So I want to do that in a principled way so that I can start to apply what I've found in this setting to other kinds of settings. It specialises theoretical and methodological resources. There's a whole load of stuff out there we can draw on in terms of ideas about understanding things, but also doing things. I'm going to just choose out of that huge spectrum a small kind of part of that. I'm going to specialize that to the particular problem that I'm looking at. And it localizes empirical settings. I've got to look somewhere, and I've got to look somehow. I've got to have some kind of limitation to where I look and how I collect data and what constitutes data. Generalizes to other settings and phenomena. It's produced through a dialogue between the theoretical and the empirical, and it's mediated as pedagogic text. That is that I have to be able to teach you what I've done through giving my account. You have to be able to open it up and pull it apart. So it's got to be a particular type of text that enables you to have that critical engagement. I'm not trying to market it to you, I'm trying to open it up to you. And so this is our diagram that represents that. And I mean, for me, this resonates back to kind of Bernstein's earlier, more kind of complex diagram, in that what we're trying to do here, I suppose, is to look at the relationship between the theoretical on one side and the empirical on the other, and this is an arbitrary division, I suppose. And on the theoretical side, we're specializing our theoretical resources, the stuff that we read, the stuff that we engage with, to the particular problem that we're engaging with. And on the empirical side, we're localizing. We're saying, well, look, I'm interested in parents and schooling, but I can't look at all parents and all schooling. I've got to look somewhere. And there's got to be kind of principles of selection. Those principles of selection have got to resonate and be consistent with the types of theoretical resources I'm drawing on the other side of the diagram. So, we've got a theoretical field. We don't actually necessarily start there, here. People start in this diagram in all sorts of different places. Some people come with a problem, comes out of their own practice, perhaps. Some people come with a particular setting. I'm a teacher in this school, I'm a lecturer in this context, I do this type of work. That's the setting within which I've got to do my research. So it may be the setting that's kind of fixed. It may be the theoretical position. I'm a Vygotskian psychologist, I don't really care what I research, as long as I use Vygotsky, or Bourdieu, or Bernstein, or whatever. So you can start in most places. Don't start with the findings. I suppose that's one place you shouldn't start. Unless you're, I could give you a list of funders, perhaps, who might like you to start with the findings. If you're doing a doctoral project, I can almost guarantee that if you start with a set of findings, you will not succeed. You'll spend all your time trying to construct everything around what you already know. And that's a dangerous and a difficult thing to do. So, theoretical field, all the stuff that's out there in the library, all the stuff we know, all the different types of perspectives that we could take, and we specialize a bit of that. I'm a sociologist, I'm interested in particular ways of thinking about things. I do particular types of work. I like talking to people, so I like to interview. So it's also I like to sit around and watch what people do. I've got a set of dispositions as well as kind of theoretical commitments that lead me towards a particular type of work. Whatever I'm focusing on, if it is parents and schooling, then I'm going to collect together a whole bunch of work that relates to that. So I'm going to search journals, find other bits of research. What are other people's positions? What are they doing? How are they doing it? And I'm going to define a problem. The problem for me is a relationship between concepts. So if I'm saying, well, kind of how does kind of social class impact on parental participation in schooling? Parental participation is an idea. Social class is an idea. These are concepts. So on this side, it's a relationship between concepts. Empirical field, can't look everywhere. Empirical setting, I can look in a particular local authority, a particular cluster of schools, a particular project that aims to bring parents and teachers together. Also, in determining the setting, I'm also thinking about my methods. What kinds of ways am I collecting data? What counts as data? All those decisions are informed by stuff on the other side of the diagram. The type of theoretical position I'm taking, the type of methodological approach, impact on how I make decisions about how I do the research, the design, the modes of data collection, modes of analysis. Changes that take place here may bring about changes on the other side. Changes on the other side may bring about changes here. Pragmatic decisions here about, well, I might want to look here, but I can't. There are ethical issues about the type of research I want to do, so I'm going to have to look somewhere else, and that may lead me to a shift in the theoretical position that I'm taking. So these two things are in dialogue with each other. One impacts on the other. Findings are kind of relationships between indicators, crudely, in kind of the old language of research. So I need to know, if I want to kind of explore social class, I've got to know, well, how do I know it? How do I recognize it? And my findings are in terms of the ways in which I recognize these things and the relationships between them. All things being well, at the end of this process, your findings relate to your problem and you've got a result. And the dialogue between the two keeps these things kind of lined up. That's Bernstein's version of knowledge production and the reproduction of knowledge. What I suppose we've tried to do is to find a way of thinking about the process of research that kind of resonates with that. But I'm also now starting to get back to where we started this, which is a shift in where knowledge is produced and how we kind of evaluate it as knowledge and who are the agents of the production of that. Nigel Fielding has thought kind of quite carefully about the relationship between the kind of research we do and we produce and the kinds of communities that might use that research. So in this case, we have thinking about policymakers as a particular kind of group that we might want to speak to. What he's saying here is that, well, it's not that theory is only relevant to researchers in enabling them to develop this kind of coherence in their work. Policymakers themselves have theories too, but they're maybe not quite so explicit. So we've got kind of an implicit set of kind of theories that are held by policymakers there. And these policy communities are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and they're starting to look at a diverse range of sources for what counts as knowledge, including kind of generating this themselves. So we're in a position where universities, which have been traditionally the places where we do our doctorates and we create new knowledge and we have research projects, are now starting to look at a challenge from a whole range of other types of institutions in terms of what constitutes knowledge and what constitutes the means of producing that knowledge. So I'm back to this again, really. It's about understanding cultures. If I'm to speak and have a relationship dialogue with policymakers, practitioners, and whatever, then I've got to understand what their kind of culture is if my message is going to be communicated. And then there's just one last kind of Bernstein quote here, which is whose knowledge, whose ruler? And in the end, there is the kind of question about kind of knowledge for what, knowledge in whose interests, and who is it that controls the means by which what counts as knowledge is kind of evaluated. What I hope I've done then is to start to kind of loop back around again to this kind of idea of this kind of shifting locus, but also problematizing the effects of that and offering a challenge to us, I suppose, as researchers, early career or otherwise, in kind of engaging with that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.